So first of all, justification by faith, the doctrine, gives us this high view of God's justice. So we really care about justice in the world. Secondly, it changes your attitude toward the poor. Thirdly, it changes the attitude of the poor. In other words, when the gospel gets a hold of the poor, and not religion, just religiosity. Remember, religion says if you live a good life, if you try hard, if you pull yourself together, if you you clean yourself up, and you try hard enough, then God will bless you, or you'll do okay. I mean, that's the self-help. You give the self-help thing to the poor, and you're going to destroy them. If you give the gospel to the poor, you will transform them. And here's why. The biblical case is this. In James chapter 1, verses 9 and 10, there's a fascinating place where it says, the poor Christian, this is a quote, ought to take pride in his high position, but the rich Christian ought to take pride in his low position because he will pass away like a wild flower. And that seems like, what? And here's what it's saying. It's just delightful. And so wise. It says, every Christian in Christ is at the same moment a vile sinner who deserves death and hell, and a fully loved adopted child of God. At the same time. In yourself, you're lost. In yourself, you deserve nothing. In Christ, you're adopted, you're loved, you're accepted. Okay, right? And here's what they're saying. Well-off Christians, successful Christians, Christians who have had a pretty good life and things have gone pretty well for them, it would be good for you to dwell on your sinful condition. It would be good for you to dwell on how you deserve nothing. It would be good for you to dwell on that because out in the world you get nothing but acclaim. This will help pull you down. It'll give you just the reality. But if you're a poor Christian, it says you ought to dwell on your high status. You ought to dwell on the fact that you're accepted. You ought to dwell on the fact that you're a child of the King. You ought to dwell on that. Because out in the world you get disdain. See, the world makes your social status and your attainment a bottom line identity. That's who you are. You are your social status. You are your bank account. But the gospel demotes those things. What it does is it takes down the people who might, because they've accomplished something, be proud. We already talked about that. But it also lifts up the people who, because of the failures that they've had in their life, because they were thrown into the inner city and they grew up with all those failures, etc., like that, it lifts them up. Listen, Miroslav Volf, in an essay called Shopkeeper's Gold some years ago, was walking the streets of inner city Baltimore, Sandtown, with Mark Gornick, who was a pastor there. And at one point, they adopted New Song Church there, and New Song Ministries adopted 12 blocks of a part of the poorest part of Baltimore, and they sought to make it a space of God's peace. They did all sorts of housing rehabilitation. They planted a church. They did an after-school program. They started a school. They did a jobs program and everything. You guys know what that's about. And as he was walking along with Miroslav Volf, who's a theologian, he suddenly said that the doctrine of justification by grace contains untapped resources for healing the inner city. And when Volf first heard that, he said, that's nuts. What are you talking about? The doctrine of justification by faith alone, what's that got to do with the inner city? And then he thought about it. And this is what he realized. He said, imagine you have no job, no money, you live cut off from the rest of society in a world ruled by poverty and violence. Your skin is the wrong color, quote unquote, wrong color, and you have no hope that any of this will ever change. Around you is a society governed by the iron law of achievement. Its gilded goods are flaunted before your eyes on TV screens, and in 1,000 ways society tells you every day you're worthless because you have no achievement. You're a failure, and you know that you will continue to be a failure because there is no way to achieve tomorrow what you have not managed to achieve today. Your dignity is shattered, your soul is enveloped in the darkness of despair, but the gospel tells you that you are not defined by outside forces. The gospel tells you that you count, even more that you're loved unconditionally and infinitely, irrespective of anything you've achieved or failed to achieve. That's the doctrine of justification by grace, proclaimed in practice. A dead doctrine? Hardly.